11 Days of Remembrance, Day 3. Chapter 3, The Gold Mines. Larry's brother Harold returned home for a visit one weekend from the gold mine where he was working. Impressed with his brother's wages, Larry began to question his rather tedious job at the factory. He made the decision to move on, and the gold mine seemed the way to go. Leaving in Harold's old beat-up Chevrolet, the two brothers began their journey that would eventually bring them to the gold mines in East Matrac, Quebec. Larry's brother-in-law, Piston ran the assay office at the mine. His job was to check all the drill core samples and weigh the gold recovered. Along with their duties, Preston was his wife Lydia lived on the mine property and company house. When Larry and Harold arrived at the mine entrance, Harold told Larry to wait at the entrance to apply for work. Never been one to give a great deal of thought to anyone else but himself, Harold zipped through the gate and was gone. The level of activity at the front entrance to the mine was somewhat chaotic. There was hundreds of people coming and going, and supplies arriving every few minutes. Being a little wet behind the ears and hot, not overly wise in the way things worked, Larry remembered the front gate of the mine for 3 days. There is where he was told they hired people, and he felt sure someone would come for him eventually. Larry took shelter and slept where he could, eventually under trucks and equipment, while he waited. After 3 days, he finally had to venture into the company store to get something to eat. He told the shopkeeper that his brother-in-law was Preston Peckham. The storekeeper stared at Larry surprised. He leaned over the counter and slapping Larry on the shoulder, he said, "Why the hell didn't you tell me you were Lydia's brother?" But before leaving the store, Larry purchased a hard hat, miner's boots, oil slicks, and assorted ingredients. Arriving at the entrance of the East Meadowlake mine, Larry was met by a foreman by the name of Kenny McLean. McLean was a bare-chested man with shoulders a pick-handled wider. He was in his mid-50s and was holding a brown folder in his left hand. The lines around his eyes and mouth were well at the assorted scars on his face and hands, depicted a 30-year-old roadmap of bone-hard labor. He had endured the extreme dangers of the mine, and it showed. His hands, the size of pie plates, he had a bone-shattering grip, and would he shook Larry's hand, it was all Larry could do not to once the desert elevator to the 600-foot level and got off. The first thing that struck Larry was the warmth. The closer he got to the core of the earth, the warmer it was. The tunnel through illuminated seemed to resemble light projected into a black void, similar to using a flashlight, which a weak bulb. It was not a place for someone that suffered from claustrophobia. Men were coming and going, and caused quite a bit of noise as they called out to one another. The sounds made settling less eerie, and although he never been underground before, Larry felt at ease. When he and McLean reached the bottom of the shaft, there was another tunnel that led to another rock face that was being mined. Larry had looked at the front of the mine, looking on the surface. It seemed like there was a few shafts and in a horizontal tunnel, but the realized complex was like a building underground. The tunnel sloped and slanted with another tunnel, and several layers of tunnel existed above that. Both men walked in silence down the slope, down dumb tube, and passed under symbols that stored up the roof to prevent it from collapsing. Shortly thereafter, a manhole was a ladder that would take them to the level above. Explaining that they would go up the ladder to the next level, McLean laid down his folder, putting his foot on the bottom step. McLean motioned for Larry to follow suit. At the very start, a man fell through the opening from the next level up and landed at Larry's feet with a snicking thud. His limbs were controlled into impossible angles. The poor man did not move, and there did not appear to be any sign of life. Shocked at what he had just witnessed, Larry peered his eyes away from the corpse to look at McLean, who simply said, "Stay here," and ran for help. Larry stood there looking at the crumpled body and was just about to bend down to check the man for vital signs when another man fell through the same opening above the first man, knocking Larry back on his behind. Larry was frozen in place. Came back with the doctor and the mine superintendent, McLean. It was apparently that both men had scrambled to their injuries. Larry found out later that he had climbed up the ladder. He too would have most likely fallen victim to the toxic gas that had built up in the level above them. The men had been working while the fumes began to permeate the air, causing them to black out and fall to their deaths. At that time, ventilation in mines wouldn't come close to what it deemed by today's standards and safety regulations. Carry on like it was just another day at the office. McLean picked up his folder, leaving the superintendent to deal with the example strolled off the tunnel. Larry had no alternative but to follow. He looked over his shoulder and thought, "Good God, this all seems to be part of a day's work." They rounded a corner and directly in front of them stood a milking machine. Milking machines ran on set of tracks on an open body to receive rocks and loose rubble that had blasted from the face of the tunnel. The operator of the machine worked from a little platform on the side, handling a small hydraulic bucket that packed up the rubble. The smoke in the tunnel directly behind him. Larry was instructed to unhole the container as the manual could not be reached by the operator generally assisted in the operation. There were numerous large rocks on the track that had not broken up small enough for them the previous blast. His partner told him to go out, get half stick of dynamite. The idea was to blast large blockade hole machine from moving forward. When Larry returned with the explosive and the detonating caps, the bunking machine was leaning over to the left and the operator was moaning in agony underneath it. Running to his side, Larry asked what the hell happened. Speaking through his teeth, the operator replied, I attempted to nudge the rock out of the way, and I drilled the machine. The huge piece of machinery was pinning the man's leg. As Larry tried to formulate a plan, the operator's face started to turn a nasty shade of green. Also, the man was in a horrendous amount of pain. Larry knew he had to do something and do it quickly. Hang on, I'll be back. Racing back up the tunnel, Larry looked for anything he could use for leveling to pry the machine off the poor man. The only thing he could to pick was ran back down the tunnel. Larry prayed he plan would work. Upon reaching the operator, he placed the plank under the machine and using the nearby blocks as a pivot, chain off the poor man's leg. Each failed attempt resulted in screams as the machine settled back on the man's injured leg. In last-ditch effort, Larry poisoned his whole body weight on the very end of the plank, and the machine lifted up, releasing the injured leg. The machine operator used his left leg to push him clear of the monking machine. Looking at the injured leg, Larry knew the man had a compound fracture, but there was surprisingly little blood running like hell to the nearest emergency phone. Larry summoned help. A few minutes later, a few men arrived and assisted him in putting the machine back on its tracks, and they carted the injured man away on a stretcher. Left on his own, Larry got a long pole and weighted in the large rock structure of the machine. He was just about to move it when a larger rock, loosened by the blast, crashed down in front of him. To hell with this, thought Larry. With his pocket knife, he cut the stick of dynamite he brought back in for equal portions, placing blasting caps in each of the portions. He locked lit the fuse together with enough length to allow him to take over around the bottom of the tunnel. Then he lit them. After the explosion, the rock was reduced to manageable size, and the track was clear for the vacuum machine. At the end of Larry's shift, he returned to his sister Ida's home. Ida was busy making dinner in the kitchen. There was pots and pans everywhere, and a delicious aroma filled the room. Setting her brother down at the kitchen table and giving him a cup of tea, she returned her back on him and began chopping carrots at the counter, carefully making small talk the entire time. She tipped the diced carrots in a pot of boiling water, her hands on her apron. Turning to Larry, she asked, "How was your first day at work?" Starting into his now empty mug of tea, Larry replied, "Two men got killed in front of me, and my partner broke his leg." Ida stared at him in silence for a moment before turning back to the counter. "Well then, let's hope your second day goes better than your first." And she carried on her simple chit-chat. Um, that's the end of chapter 3. I'll do chapter 4 tomorrow. Um, if you see a veteran, say thank you to them. And if you see one that's down, just talk to them. They might be having a bad day, and they might just want a friend. And thank a veteran, and I thank the veterans who fought in World War I, World War II, the fight so I could be free so I can do my YouTube videos.